Hello and welcome to the Sunshine PowerCuts Sunshine Summit 2018. My name is Heather and I am the host of Sunshine PowerCuts, a podcast that features two types of episodes that alternate. Sunshine ones of inspiration drawn from nature, and in the PowerCut ones, I share insights into my life living off the power grid. This week, I'm bringing a week of live streams celebrating connections with some of the incredible people that I've had the chance to get to know over the past year and the connections that they've made on their journeys. So today, for day 4, I am very grateful to be joined by a person who has a real connection with nature. It is the essence of her podcast, and that is Suzy Buttress of the Casual Birder Podcast. Hello, Suzy. How are you?
Hi there, Heather.
Thank you so much.
I'm good, thank you.
I'm glad you're good. Thank you for joining me today. You have the Casual Birder Podcast, and it is about your casual birding experiences that you have. And we connected either in one of the community groups we were in on Facebook, like Lady Pod Squad, which is an incredible community, and the Underdog Pod Squad podcast community there on Facebook. And eventually I reached out on Twitter and said, hey, Suzy, I've listened to your show. I love it. I love what you do. I love the sound of it. It's very similar to mine in a way, and wanted to know if you wanted to collaborate with me. And you very kindly said yes, and here we are today. So if you would like to tell everyone a little bit about yourself and how the Casual Birder Podcast came to be, that would be great.
Okay, yeah, and first of all, can I just say how amazing your strategy was for getting me to listen to your show by telling me how fantastic mine was and how aligned we were. But I really do enjoy your show as well, and I urge people to listen because it's I love the dual aspect of your show.
Thank you.
And it's teaching me quite a lot, so that's great. So I have been a long time podcast listener and never really thought that I would have a podcast of my own. But I had a message that I wanted to get out. I've been a passionate bird watcher for since I've been a child. But although I'm passionate about it, I'm quite casual about it. I will just fit my bird watching in around the other things that I'm doing. I do go on holidays and look for birds, and I do enjoy the time spent looking at birds, but I'm not the sort of person to chase off around the country trying to find a particular bird. One of my strong impressions, or one of my strong feelings, is that when I speak to people about birds, very often they'll say, yeah, no, I'm not a bird watcher. I'm not one of those types of people, because there's ideas about what a bird watcher is. But then almost in the next breath, people generally say something like, oh, but I must tell you about this woodpecker that comes to my garden, or I must tell you about these birds I see in my garden. And all these people that say they're not bird watchers suddenly have all these tales of the birds that they've seen. And I realised that actually there's lots and lots of people who, as part of their everyday chores, are noticing birds. And I think that's wonderful. And I thought, why not bring that message to even more people? Because since I've been doing the podcast and sharing my stories with people, I've had so many others that have said to me, I didn't even think of looking for birds before I heard your podcast, but now I'm standing at the bus stop noticing them. I'm at the train station noticing them. And people are just noticing nature as part of their everyday lives. And I think that's tremendous.
I love that part. I think that's awesome. It aligns so much with what I'm trying to do, just inspire people to remember that nature is out there and to get out there. And I am just like everybody else. I'm a really busy person, and sometimes it's hard for me to even get out there. But since listening to your podcast, even I am taking more notice of the birds around me. And it was fun. Recently, you called for people to do a 10-minute bird watch and see what is out there, because it doesn't take that long. And you just take notice, though. Stop and take notice of what's out there and let you know what was happening. So, yeah. I love your podcast.
And thank you. And what's so exciting about that is when I first started the show, I had no idea. I mean, I know the internet reaches a lot of people, but I had no idea quite how far reaching my audience would be. And not only have I got people in the UK and Europe listening, but I've got people across the world, in Australia and New Zealand, in Canada and America. And what's really lovely is people tell me about the birds they're seeing, and they might say something like, "Oh, I only have cardinals in my garden." And to me, it's like, "Oh, cardinals, I'd love to see a cardinal." And then I might say, "Oh, I've just got a blue tit, or great tits in the garden, or a Eurasian jay." And I mean, the jay is a little bit more special to me, um, but then it's really fascinating for people living elsewhere that we have those birds in our garden. And one of the things I learned early on, my very first episode was on the blackbird, which is the Eurasian or the European blackbird.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea that there were a whole group of birds called blackbirds in America. And very quickly, people were telling me, you can't just call it blackbird, because we have like 20 different species that are all known as blackbirds. And they're all different types of birds as well. They're not all the same type of, from the thrush family. There are a whole variety of birds. So that made me a little bit more careful about how I described the birds. One of the things I said just now, which I shouldn't really have said, is how I've got some birds in my garden that I might feel are a little bit more boring than others. And actually, I don't truly think that. I will see birds that I see every day, and familiarity can breed a little bit of contempt, but actually I still enjoy seeing them. And it's through the lens of talking to people around the world, it's made me appreciate my local birds even more, because to people elsewhere, my local birds are actually quite special, and their birds are special to me. So none of us have boring birds.
Yeah.
We might have birds that we would prefer not to be around for various reasons, but you know, at the end of the day, they're all really wonderful to see.
They are. And they also have different behaviors and things. So I know that from where you can sit and you've got is it an outside office space, like a separate place where you can record from, or edit
At
from?
work, you mean?
At home in your garden, is it?
Oh yes, I've got a summer house in the garden, so I can go and sit out there and record.
Yeah, and looking out the window, and when we had a chat one time, there were some birds, and you were telling me that, you know, when some are around, the others kind of hang back, and when they've gone, they come in. So, you know, even if they're common or
That's absolutely. That was something that I'd noticed quite recently. I remember now that chat we had. We were talking using video chat, and it was quite a warm day here, so I had my patio windows open, and I kept getting distracted because I could see movement out the side of my vision, and had to keep saying to you, "Oh, goldfinch has just turned up," or "Oh, a rook has just turned up." And it was by looking at the large blackbirds, and I noticed that. So we have members of the crow family. We have rooks and jackdaws that come to the garden, generally only during the time they have young. We also have carrion crows that are around. They very rarely come in the garden, but when they do, all the songbirds just leave the garden. And I was very intrigued to see how when the rooks and jackdaws were in the garden, the songbirds would stay around. And I think it's because of what the birds eat. The songbirds would be a prey bird to the carrion crows. but to the rooks and jackdaws, they're not. Although, interestingly, I mentioned my theory to one of my other guests, Julian, who recently walked from Land's End to Donegroats to raise money for eye research.
Mm-hmm.
And in his garden, the jackdaws are very much the aggressors. So it is interesting how even just within the same country, birds will act differently. Sorry, I've just realised I've gone off talking about birds, which is what I do all the time. If I'm not talking about birds, I'm talking about podcasts.
That's awesome, Suzy. That's what this is all about. And I love that you are so passionate about them and about podcasting too. So if we want to just, we've got a question from Bandrew from Podcastage. He said, what's the one bird that you would prefer not to be around if there is one?
I think that's a really good question.
Yeah.
I'll come back to it because there are various birds, and I think mainly, no, I'll come back to it because I don't have one species that I don't want to see.
Okay. Here,
I'll come back to that one.
Yeah, when I did my 10-minute bird watch after you suggested it, I noticed we have quite a lot of birds here, and I also did a little video recording on my phone, and I think I was recording the pukeko, which purple swamp hen, and yeah, when they were walking across the lawn, I have a story that they used to have about 30 or more that used to hang out on my property, and they're not here anymore. And those numbers, there was a 2 this particular day, and while they're pretty looking and they're kind of interesting, they're kind of a bird that I would prefer not to be around just because they're a little bit destructive and they attack other things as well. But I'm not going to go out of my way to make them not be around, although that's what my theory is on why there aren't so many around anymore. I think that people have culled them out a little bit. So, yeah, pukeko are very funny birds, but they are vicious to each other and a little bit vicious to other animals. Like if you had chickens or other things, they kind of attack them and stuff. So, yeah.
So do you think that's because they're territorial and so they're protecting what they see as their territory?
Yeah, totally. They have
just on that note.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I was just going to say on that note, they were. For people that haven't seen that video, and for people in the UK, for example, I was just going to say that they're of a similar family to moorhens and coots, and they can also be quite aggressive at times. While they might look quite mild, with other birds they can be quite aggressive. So, and I think that's obviously a trait that they have.
Yeah, they have very strong legs, and they kind of jump on top of the other one and kind of rip them to bits with their legs.
Which is just like the coots would do. They are very aggressive, especially during the breeding season when they're fighting for territories.
Yeah. So about that, because you've become quite knowledgeable about a whole bunch of birds now, and or a flock of birds. What's the better term to refer to a group of birds? Sorry.
Let's go for bunch. It's fine.
Birds. I'm sorry. And so has that come about with connecting with books or just your experiences watching birds? How have you connected with the information to give you that knowledge?
Well, I've been watching birds and observing birds ever since I was very young.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started the podcast, I wanted to do it from my own position, so from my own observations. I gather my own sound recordings.
Yeah.
Some might say they're not always best, but I gather my own sound recordings and I use my own observations. But sometimes I'll want to talk about birds that I either haven't seen very much of or haven't seen at all, but they tie in with a bird that I do know quite well. Yeah. And so what I've been doing is looking to have people as guests on my show that can talk about the birds from their experiences. What I wanted to do from very early on was avoid just looking at Wikipedia or just looking at other people's content. I wanted my show to be about the birds that I see and the birds that I share with others. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to hear bird tales from other people as well. Yeah. And that's how I've set my show.
Yeah, I love that because it's quite enriching hearing the different stories behind it. People bring, we're in different locations for a start geographically, so our birds are different, and then we've got different attachments to different birds as well. So yeah, it's fascinating hearing that from people. And just going to the podcasting side of things, you've been a podcast listener before you began podcasting. So if you want to tell us a little bit of your backstory, that would be very cool.
So I've been listening to podcasts for about 10 years. So I've been listening a very long time. And one of the earliest podcasts I was listening to was something called Stop Podcasting Yourself, which is a Canadian podcast. I've been listening to that for probably about 8 or 9 years. And they joined a network several years ago, the Maximum Fun Network. And gradually I started to listen to more and more podcasts on the Maximum Fun Network and found that I really, really enjoyed them. They've got a great range of shows there, and became such a fan of the podcast there that I've become a monthly donor. So I have I pay to help the creators that I enjoy listening to continue creating. And but it's an American network. There is a British show on there, the Beef and Dairy Network, but most of the shows are American. And I wanted to talk to people about the shows that I was listening to, and no one I knew, I think less than 3 people knew what a podcast was when I was listening to them. And that hasn't changed a great deal, I have to say. It's getting better. But also, if they had listened to podcasts, they hadn't listened to the ones that I listened to.
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago, I went to the London Podcast Festival, and a couple of the Maximum Fun shows were going to be performing live. And I connected with a few people there, and there was already a group that had just been started up of fans of the shows. And so I joined the group.
Yeah.
And after the podcast festival, I wanted to continue to talk to people because this was amazing. It meant that I could talk to people about the shows that I loved, and they knew those shows as well. And so I started to arrange meetups in London for Maximum Fun fans, and I've been doing that since. Since I've had the podcast, I've not had as many meetups for the Max Fun fans. We are still meeting up, but just not as frequently.
Mm-hmm.
But that's mainly because I've also started meeting up with podcasters. Because now that I've got my own podcast, I'm really keen to meet other podcasters. And it's really opened my eyes to the variety of shows that are out there.
Mm.
And the types of people that have podcasts. And it's just been such an amazingly, both the Max Fun community, so the fan community that I'm part of, and then the podcasting community, so the creating community, just amazingly supportive people.
Yeah.
And it just feels so wonderful to be part of, to be able to reach out to people and, as you say, make connections with them and find that we're kind of on the same page about our passions. And that's just one of the wonderful things about the internet. I know the internet can have negative aspects, but to be able to reach out and find people that have similar joys and similar excitements about things as you do. So, you know, we've probably all been there and had something that we're really passionate about and tried to talk to friends and family about it. And we just can't connect because unless we're all watching the same show, because entertainment is so diverse now, it's really hard to find people that can really understand your passion. So the fan communities build up. And one of the wonderful things about them is that you're communicating with other fans.
Yeah.
So, you know, you can be as geeky or as enthusiastic as you like, because they're going to reflect that back to you.
Yeah. On that note, Andrew asked, is Judge John Hodgman on Max FunCon? And if so, are you a fan of that show?
Oh my goodness. I can tell that Andrew hasn't been looking at my feeds at all, because Judge John Hodgman, the show, is one of my favourites, and I'm a very big fan of John Hodgman. So yeah, and you don't have to look very far in my feeds to find that out.
So yes, the answer is a yes.
I was very lucky, actually. Yeah, I was very lucky to be able to meet him last year.
Yeah.
And that was amazing.
So on that note, how did you get to meet him?
Well, that was part of that. He was appearing in the Judge John Hodgman podcast at the podcast festival last year. And I organised a meetup for all of the fans to meet Jesse Thorne, who is the owner of, he's the owner of Max Fun Network. And Judge John Hodgman was on. Jesse plays the bailiff in that show as well. So to have both Jesse Thorne and John Hodgman come to the meetup was just amazing. We also had Jennifer Marmer, who is the producer of the show, and Nick Lau, who's one of the other producers. But it was just amazing to have members of Maximum Fun Network attend the meetup, and I think people really enjoyed being able to meet them and actually speak to them directly about how much the shows mean to us and how much enjoyment we get from the weekly shows.
Yeah, that's incredible. And you've still got those connections with them, because this year they had the Max Fun Con in LA. That was the event that you went to recently. So I'd love to hear more about that. I've heard about it, but I just I hung on your every word last time. So if
haven't you heard about it? You were kind enough to let me speak at length about my experiences there, because that's one of the most wonderful things that's happened this year. So Maximum Fun very much enjoy the community aspect of the fans. They want people to be able to get together and meet each other, enjoy friendships, and just enjoy, as I said before, about the sharing the passions of listening to the podcasts or taking part in those fan communities. And so they've been hosting for quite a few years now something called Max FunCon, which is a small grouping of people. I think it's about 200 people are able to go to it. And traditionally, not traditionally, I can't think of the word, but most of the time it's been held at Lake Arrowhead in California, but they have had some Max FunCon Easts on the East Coast, but they're now keeping it in California. And I'd wanted to go for years, and amazingly this year I was able to do it. So as I say, there's only 200 people that go, but I've been for some time in a chat room using Slack, which I only came across in the last couple of years, with some of the Max Fun fans, and we'd got chatting, and I continue to go to this Slack because while it's great to use things like Facebook and other kinds of and Twitter, it doesn't give you the immediacy or the connection directly with someone chatting. And so these are very much like the old-fashioned chat rooms, but just for the modern age. And so I had built up some friendships in the chat room, and I knew that these were people that regularly went to Max FunCon. So when the opportunity came for me to be able to go as well, that was just amazing, because I already had friends that were going to be there, and to be able to meet them in person was just an added layer of awesomeness. So I honestly, it was a really emotional time for me to be there, but I was able to do because of the podcast, I was able to lead some bird walks while I was there, as part of the sort of they have classes on all sorts of things, like learning how to do puppeteering, or this year this was, and or they had a coach that taught baseball moves, and I was able to, with one of the other producers of Max Fun podcasts, Kevin Ferguson, we took 2 groups of people out on a bird walk around the conference centre grounds, and that was just amazing. Oh, bless you.
Thank you,
and that's fine. But what I did was, normally my husband and I spend our holidays obviously together, traveling as much as we can, and I got special dispensation this time to be able to have a solo holiday. I would really have loved him to come along, but while he listens to podcasts, he's nowhere near as fanatical about them as I am. And what I wanted to do while I was out there is connect with people, conduct some interviews, which I was able to do, and to go on bird walks to gather more bird sounds and experiences while I was out there. And all of those experiences and interviews are gradually coming out now over the next couple of months. I'm trying not to flood everyone with them. I'm trying to pace them, but I've still got plenty of material from there. And what my husband did, which was really lovely, was he decided he was going to do a holiday that I no longer want to do, which is backpacking and camping. More than happy to go camping. I'm not so keen on backpacking anymore. So he took himself off to the Scottish Islands and did a backpacking holiday. But while he was there, he kept an audio diary of of the nature that he was seeing and some of the encounters that he had with the wildlife, which I won't go into now because it will be appearing on my podcast coming up. But he also recorded lots of bird sounds for me as well. So that was really wonderful to have like a roving reporter for me. But it was great because he was sending me sound files to tell me about how his days were going while I was in hot California enjoying LA living. But yeah, this year so far has been absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. I love that you have those connections with the Max Fun community and that you participate in the Max Fun Con. I think that's an incredible opportunity to make connections with people, to enjoy and celebrate the things that you've been listening to, the shows that you love on there, and just, the opportunity to do the bird walk and be a part of kind of the event itself in a way that's just wow. And part of that...
Yes, amazing.
Yeah, and then the Slack group and having those connections before you went, so the friends that you were able to connect with. And I love that about Discord. So Discord is kind of like Slack, where it's kind of the chat room function thing, and it's been incredible for me. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in this Sunshine Summit. But yeah, and your husband wasn't so keen to get on the mic in the beginning, but he managed to get there and do the recordings for you while he was on his holiday. So it's cool that you're sharing that with him, and he's come out on bird walks with you. And
I kind of made him do it because I was aware that he would probably get some wonderful soundscapes while he was up there. So I just bought him a little mic, it's actually the one that I'm wearing tonight, a little one that will fold away, very, very discreet, but that should he hear a bird that he thought I might like to hear, he could just plug that into his iPhone and make the recording. I think getting him on the show, that was never going to happen until I wanted to talk about the penguins. We've been lucky enough to see penguins in the wild, and he's got such a great memory. He actually had slightly different experiences to me while we were on that vacation, and so I actually interviewed him for that show. And I think since then he's got a little bit more comfortable with being on the show. And like, for example, this last weekend we did a bird walk at Watership Down in Hampshire. And he featured on the show there.
It's cool though that, like, I have a similar thing. My family weren't too into podcasts, didn't know what they were. It's the same thing. My circle of people, I've got one or two people who listened to podcasts before I brought it up with them. But it's kind of growing now, and there's getting a little bit of, it's not huge, but a little bit of excitement there. But it is nice to be able to share that with someone who's that close to home, because we are so passionate about it. So yeah. There's things that you want to work on and go forward with, and one of the cool things, if you wanted to talk about it, is connecting with people in libraries.
So one of the things I mentioned earlier was that still, for those of us that have podcasts or listen to podcasts a lot, it can feel like, well, of course, everyone knows what a podcast is. It's always, you'll hear radio programs now even say, well, do listen to our podcast as well. And podcast, if you've got iTunes, or there's all sorts of ways you can find out about podcasts. And yet there's a large number of people, especially in the UK, who either don't know what a podcast is or have heard the word but don't really know what it is and haven't listened. And so in two ways. One way, because I want to share podcasts with people. I want people to enjoy the hours and hours and hours of free entertainment that there is, and education as well, with people. But also, it'd be great if people want to listen to my show a little bit more. I think every audience member that you build up, it's an audience member for everyone, because people generally, once they start listening to podcasts, they don't listen to just one show. They'll listen to a variety of things. It's like when you're watching TV. You don't only watch one type of TV program. You'll watch a variety, just depending on your mood or what it is that you want to get out of the show. And it's the same with podcasts. So one thing that struck me is that people probably slightly older than me, I'm an older person myself, but I got a computer and started to become familiar with technology quite late on, just because it wasn't part of my growing up. And in fact, I didn't get my first computer until I was probably late 20s, early 30s. But of course, for children now growing up, technology is all around them, and it's second nature to have a Palm computer, something that, you know, your iPhone or your smartphone has access to so many things. But for people older than me that grew up without having smartphones, there can still be quite a reluctance to even have a mobile phone, and if they have one, maybe only use it, you know, maybe they go as far as texting but don't really use it very much. And I know lots of people like that. So one of the things that I really felt passionate about, and still do feel passionate about, is trying to help people understand that there are thousands and thousands of hours of entertainment, education, information available in podcast form. And one of the other things that struck me is that there are a lot of people around who don't have access to their families anymore for whatever reason, or don't have friendship groups, especially the more sort of isolated older people. And one of the amazing things about listening to podcasts is, you get to know the podcast hosts through the shows, so you feel like you've got a friend in your ears. But also, just through the shows, very often there's some sort of fan community, and of all types. And so I feel like there's a wonderful connection that can be made for people, especially people who possibly suffer from social isolation or social exclusion. So I spoke to my local library because I wanted to try and find a way to help people access podcasts, or even just know about them. And it turned out that they were doing an event in October coming up that would tie in very nicely with that. So I reached out to a few other podcasters and said, was there anyone in the local area that would want to help out with this? And amazingly, I found another 3 podcasters that I didn't even know about in the area. So for some time, I thought I was probably the only podcaster in my town, but turns out I'm not. But actually, they were interested in reaching out too. And so we're getting together, and we're going to provide one-on-one coaching sessions. Sorry, that sounds a bit too grand. Basically, we're going to be at the library during this event, and should people want to find out about podcasts, we can tell them what they are. We can show them one-to-one at the pace that they want to listen to or participate in, how to find a podcast, how to download it, and then how they would listen. And we'll give them a list of suggested podcasts that will be curated by us, but from the great vast knowledge of podcasts that we've built up ourselves. So it won't just be like they have to listen to a bird podcast. If they want to, they can, and I'll be very happy if it's mine. But really, it's just enabling people to know that there are thousands of hours of free entertainment available to everyone. And you could be listening to podcasts from around the world on a topic, any topic you can think of, there's a podcast on. So if you've got a really niche hobby or interest, there's going to be a podcast out there for you. And it's just really fun to connect.
Yeah. I think that it's cool that the library is doing the event. So what is the actual event about? Sorry.
Yeah, it's called the Get Online Week. And what that's for is to help people. I think, there are some boring procedural things, like we have a system of universal credit, and for accessing that, while it's still going to be accessible for people that don't have access to the internet, it's going to be that you can manage your accounts online. And so what the library are doing are helping people understand how they would actually access that, because a lot of people either are nervous about using things online or just haven't had the experience. If they've not had jobs where they've had to use computers and they haven't traditionally had computers in their home, it's actually quite daunting to find out that actually one of the only ways to access something is online, or that you can get a lot more information from online. So what the library is doing is enabling people to do that, but they wanted to find some fun things to do as well, and luckily they thought podcasting would be fun, so we're helping them out. But it's actually going to go further than that. I'm going to be, what I found as part of my podcast, which I hadn't considered when I started, was how being such an audio medium, for people with sight loss, it's a very accessible entertainment medium. And I've got people listening to my show that have contacted me to say that they've either lost their sight through their life or didn't have sight from when they were born, but that they enjoy my show. And I've been put in touch with quite a few people who are doing research into sight loss. And I mentioned this to my local library, and they have some groups that meet up that are with people with sight loss. And so I'm going to be talking to them about accessing podcasts as well, and listening to podcasts. So it's given me an opportunity to do some talks as well, which I'm quite excited about.
That is awesome. We've got Charlotte White in the chat, and she said that I love that you are spreading the word through libraries.
Now, Charlotte is someone that I met very recently at an event in London, and I did my usual thing of wanting. I'll be honest, I get a little bit nervous when I go to events. I just have a little bit of anxiety going, and I have found for myself a great tip to get myself not to be nervous is to host something, because then I'm concerned about other people's nervousness and making them feel comfortable, or allowing them to feel comfortable, and not feeling nervous myself. And so there was this event recently in London, and I really wanted to go to it, but I was a little bit nervous about going. So I suggested that a few of us meet up beforehand, and I created a sort of meet up in advance of the thing. And quite a lot of people came along to it. And I had some great feedback afterwards to say that, a lot of people feel this, they go to an event, they want to network, but actually it's quite daunting when you first get there and there's just a lot of people. It doesn't matter how friendly the people are, it's just daunting to see lots of people all together.
Mm-hmm.
So having this space was really nice, and Charlotte came along to that, and we connected there. So sorry, what was Charlotte's question again? Did she have a question, or was it a comment?
She just said that she loves that you are spreading the word through libraries. So welcome, Charlotte. I'm so glad that you can make it to the live stream today to hang out with us and celebrate with Suzy. It's so nice to have you there as a new connection for Suzy.
One thing, and I do actually have a librarianship degree. I am an ex-librarian, so I very much support libraries, although I don't seem to do that because I'm no longer a librarian. But it is interesting how many librarians either have podcasts or are very active in the podcasting fan community.
Okay.
There's obviously a synergy there.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but that's really awesome. I think the libraries kind of bring people together in a community. Like that and skills and things, some of the main things that bring people together in communities, but libraries are really awesome, and that they're branching out and helping the community, especially the older community or ones who don't have that digital experience, to help them learn and feel safe about it, because it's, like you said, daunting and overwhelming, and they need someone to go at their own pace because they're not going to get it if they went to just anywhere. I think librarians have patience.
Well, I think also in families now, as I mentioned earlier, the children are growing up with technology, and they almost know it as a second. It's almost as easy as breathing to access technology. But what I've found is that younger people, and we were all guilty of it, sometimes think that older people are just they can't get with it. So if you're trying to explain how something works, when you're young, you're a little bit impatient because you know how it works. Why can't these people understand how things work? And so that can actually make people feel withdrawn about asking for help, because you don't want to appear like you can't get it.
Yeah.
And I can see both sides because I'm incredibly enthusiastic about it. But, there are things that I don't get too. And I need a little bit of extra coaching to get somewhere. So I think it's very important that people are able to do things at their own pace. And I'm going to the extreme end of one-on-one conversations with people just to help them find the information. And if I make one person a podcast fan, then that's great.
Yeah.
I know it's only one person at a time, and there's a lot of audience out there to reach. But for every one person, if they start to really enjoy listening, they'll tell their friends, and
that's right.
It will snowball from there.
Yeah. I have a saying that all it takes is a spark, and that spark of generosity of your time with one person, you don't know the ripple effect that can have, and it's just incredible. Adam's in the live chat, and he said that his wife is going back to school to be a librarian. So that's quite cool.
Oh, wow.
And Bandrew said
Absolutely.
hashtag libraries are the best. And Tim said everyone should have to teach computer use to older folks. It really helps to teach patience. But yeah, I think that it's awesome that if the podcasters that you connected with are keen to participate and help as well, so that there's a few of you there able to do that. That is awesome. And going back to the sight loss thing, you connected with Julian. You mentioned him briefly, but he did a massive walk, and he was raising funds for that. So if you want to tell us a little bit about that, because I think that was an incredible journey that he went on and your connection with him.
Yeah, so quite early on in my podcasting, Sarah Bell from Exeter University contacted me, and we had some exchanges. And she's doing some research into connecting with nature via senses other than sight. And she introduced me to Julian. And Julian is a very keen birder.
Mm-hmm.
He's been a fan of watching birds, listening to birds all his life. And he has a genetic condition that meant he was going to lose his sight at some point, and he wasn't sure when. And it happened in 2010 that he started to lose his sight. So he's now become a passionate what do you call it, a proponent of ensuring that there's money for eye research, because that is one of the areas of research, medical research, that tends to be overlooked and underfunded. And so Julian came up with this amazing idea to walk from Land's End to John O'Groats with a team to really publicise a variety of things, but the primary thing was to raise money for eye research. Now, given that Julian is such a fan of birds, I was able to talk to him for my show, and I interviewed him before he started the journey.
Mm-hmm.
And he was telling me about all the wonderful birds that he has in his garden. Sounds absolutely amazing there. But one of the things he was interested in doing was seeing how what birds he could hear as he was moving through the country. So starting from the southwest in Cornwall, and then moving all the way up through England and then into Scotland and right up to the north of Scotland, how the birds he would hear would change. It took him, I think, just over 7 weeks to walk it, and it was during the key breeding period, so there were lots of birds sung around. Cool. But I was able to talk to him halfway through the journey, and then again when he finished, just to sort of hear about his experiences and what birds he was hearing. And that was absolutely fascinating to be able to connect with Julian and to help publicise the good cause that he was doing the walk for, but also to hear about the birds he was hearing.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I love that there's research being done into connecting with nature with other senses too, because you take that for granted. I can look out the window now and see what's out there. I can also hear it. But I think, and coming back to kind of like my podcast and relating it to yours, is that mine is about slowing down, and you say about slowing down. You generously lent me a clip that you'd recorded about what birding means to you and how it makes you feel, which is awesome. I included that in a podcast episode of mine. And it doesn't take time, but we can take it for granted. Nature's right out there, and Julian's doing an amazing thing. He can recognize the bird's song via audio only, since he can't visually see them. And so, yeah, sharing that with everyone is incredible. And I'm so glad that you connected with him and were able to follow his journey and share that with everyone.
Absolutely. And, listening to nature is another thing. It adds, for those of us that are fortunate enough to have hearing still, it's another way to find out what birds are around us, because so often you focus just on, keeping your head, actually, to be honest, I was going to say keeping your head down, being on your iPhone. But actually, if you're listening to your environment, you can do that and still notice that there's some goldfinches there or a bullfinch that's just flown by. I think I'm quite attuned to bird calls.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a music listener very much. I mainly if I decide I want to listen to music, it's generally sort of diva type songs from the 80s, and I'll sing along to them. I'm not choosing to listen to music. I'm very much a spoken word person, which is why I enjoy podcasts so much.
Yeah.
But I have noticed a lot that I really tune into bird calls. And so if I can be in my house doing housework occasionally, but I can be doing chores actually inside the house, and I can, above all other noises, I can hear that there's something going on outside. I can hear a bird call, and that will generally get me rushing to the window to see what bird is out there. And I've gradually built up a knowledge of the birds that are around, but only really woodland birds or garden birds. There's masses more birds that I don't know the calls of. So there's so much more for me to learn, to get out there and do.
And that's awesome that you're excited about that. And I would love one day, because you've traveled, and one day if your travels bring you all the way down to the bottom of the world, to New Zealand, that would be, well, not the bottom of the world, but to this far, to New Zealand, that would be amazing.
Aren't we the bottom of the world to you? But you might be able to see behind me. I have a couple of New Zealand guidebooks. It's definitely on our plans to be coming down there.
Yes.
And I'm really looking forward to that. But again, just this weekend, someone in New Zealand sent me a sound file of some of the birds that they have in their garden. And it's just things like that, just hearing, oh my gosh, that's so exciting. I want to hear that bird too. So yes, if you wouldn't mind sending me just a few more sound recordings. Each time you send me something, I'm coming that little bit closer to you.
I'll get on it. I'll spam you with bird songs so you can come faster.
Fantastic.
Yeah. John is in the chat and he said, I saw a goldfinch for the first time. It's actually native to Alberta and some of North America. It was beautiful. That's really cool.
Oh, wow. Yeah. They're beautiful birds. I wonder if that's the American goldfinch that he's talking about, which is in the summer plumage, is a really beautiful golden yellow bird with black head. And we have the European goldfinch over here in the UK and Europe, and that is a much more multicoloured bird.
Yeah.
Has very similar characteristics to the American goldfinch in terms of the shape of the bill and mannerisms. But it's interesting how they're such different looking birds. And our goldfinch is named for the gold panels in the wings.
Okay.
But when I first saw my first American goldfinch and the colours, the vibrancy of the yellow is just stunning, just beautiful.
He said, yes, it was the American goldfinch. That's so cool. A couple of the birds that hang out here, I have fantails. I have kingfishers, which sit on my fence posts, and they're pretty funny. They just sit there and kind of look out, and then off they dash to somewhere. We've got the plovers, or plovers as I like to call them, which I mentioned to you, and they have bizarre behaviour. They're really fun and entertaining to watch. Plus, they've kind of got a screech they're a bird that I wouldn't mind if they didn't come back.
Oh, yes. I remember you telling me about those. Yes, very very strange calls. Yes.
Yeah. And then we've got the pukeko, like I said, and we've got blackbirds and sparrows and things. So, and there's harrier hawks, New Zealand harrier hawks that fly around too, which is kind of interesting, and they're quite majestic. I like them. And what was the other one? Magpies, and they're funny. They sit there and call out and sing, and funny bird.
Yes, because your magpies, are they similar to the Australian magpies?
I think so.
So they're different to our magpies.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that they've all got a similar name. But when I first saw the magpies, because we went to Australia a few years ago, when I first saw those ones and heard the songs that they come out with, they've got a real range of vocalizations that they can make.
Yeah.
And they seem quite cheeky birds.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that they could get into mischief.
Yeah. It's like a warble.
Quite characterful.
I really enjoy them. They're quite a lot of fun. Yeah. And I love that you're encouraging people to just take a few minutes to stop and listen, because we can rush and we can forget and we just take it for granted. But it's amazing what you do notice when you do take the time. Tim said we've had sandhill cranes walking around the apartment quads at work. He had no idea they were so big.
Oh, wow. No, and I've heard of them, but I've never seen them. And yes, apparently they are very tall birds, which can be quite surprising when you see them close up. Just back on that note that you said about taking the time to listen, and thank you very much for playing the piece that I sent you.
You're welcome. So grateful you
Your
gave it to me.
podcast is the only podcast that has heard that so far. So it's an exclusive. I haven't even played it on my own podcast. But that is one thing I hadn't really considered before, that I get a lot of peace from watching the birds, especially if I'm feeling particularly stressed. And I've been doing it more and more since I've had the podcast, actually going out for walks and listening to the birds that I hear when I go out.
Yeah.
Because when you're focusing on the birds, it does take you out of yourself a little bit, because you're suddenly noticing the dramas around you that are happening in the bird world. It just gives you those few moments of just space to get your own head back together again. And so I highly recommend, just taking that time out in nature. There's a few people that I'm going to be connecting with that, apart from you, Heather, obviously, who are also looking at how connecting with nature and wildlife can be helpful from a mental health perspective. And there's a few people that I've approached for interviews, so cool. Do keep listening. I mean, that is that's another thing I just wanted to mention, another aspect to my podcast that I hadn't thought of when I started, was that actually I'm connecting with people with all sorts of differing interests. So, for example, I was put in touch with ATM, who's a street artist who's been painting these enormous bird murals. He's been commissioned to do those to help raise awareness of species that are under threat, but also to bring some nature back into urban areas, for example. And it's usually the murals are done in conjunction with other plantings or green spaces to help urban areas produce some sort of community feeling, so for people to get together over small gardens, but also just to raise awareness by having these murals around in the urban environment. And through that, I met with Avi in New York recently to talk to him about the Audubon mural project. And again, that's going to be coming up in a future episode. But through my podcast, I've now been contacting so many people who are passionate about birds, but not in the traditional bird watching way, for example. So there's someone that I'm connecting with who specifically looks at birding as a way of assisting with keeping healthy mentally, so keeping stress-free and having a space to go to in nature to pull you away from the concerns of everyday life. And obviously the art aspect with the mural project, I'm not a particularly artistic person. I've been to a few galleries, but I don't necessarily notice art. Sorry, I'm smiling there because there's one thing that happened when I was going on this walk around New York with Avi. He wanted to show me this mural, and it was a mural that covered 3 building blocks. As I said that, it sounded like a strange thing. 3 apartment blocks together. So 3 enormous apartment blocks had this giant mural painted over it. And he had to point it out to me because we were near a few trees in a cemetery. And I was, because it was trees, I was immediately looking around for movement and birds. And then he sort of had to say, oh, by the way, you might want to notice this. And when I looked around, there was this absolutely enormous mural that was stunning.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I just hadn't seen it because it was part of the buildings. But that's just me. I'm looking for movement all the time with birds, whereas other people would have noticed the building and then noticed all the birds on the murals. So I felt quite embarrassed that I hadn't spotted that.
You were taking the opportunity that you had there, but I know what you're saying. I think that's incredible that you've made these other connections with people who are in areas that you might not have necessarily thought of beforehand, and that's really cool about the health and the and nature. I think that's important. And I know that's something that I want to do, is make more connections in those areas as well. I was very lucky that my Sunshine episodes have been recommended to a mental health practitioner here in New Zealand as a thing for meditation and to help people. So that was an incredible
Wonderful
lift. It was one of my listeners who recommended it for me. So thank you so much for doing that. We've got Rhett Hall, who popped by the chat and said, "Hey, Suzy," or Suzy. And he said he's been here.
Hi, Rhett.
He's been here 5 minutes and can feel his blood pressure getting lower and lower, because Adam said earlier that this is probably going to be a very calming episode with the two of us. And John said,
yes, I should try to speak more calmly rather than all enthusiastic and lively.
No, it's good. We can have the calm and we can have the excitement. We can have both. And so I think I've enjoyed the conversation so far today. And John said he has a red-crowned kakariki parakeet. They are a native of New Zealand, I believe. They have to be one of the most amazing sounding birds as well. So that's incredible. How did you manage to come by one of those?
If he wants to send, I was going to say, if he wants to send me a sound file from that, I would love to hear them.
Yeah, that would be awesome. And Adam said, sunshine and casual birding, breathe in and out, nice and calm. But on that note, so if he wanted to send it to you, where would he be able to do that, Suzy? How can we connect with you and the Casual Birder podcast?
Well, I have a Gmail account. So if you want to email me, you can email me at casualbirderpod@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter. Generally, it's always Casual Birder something. So on Twitter, I'm at Casual Birder Pod, and I'm on Instagram at Casual Birder Podcast. So it's usually, as I say, just Casual Birder. Look for me. I'm just checking my. Oh, look! Here's a business card. I've got business cards too. Oh, and a big shout out to Randy, sorry, I totally forgot his name, having said a big shout out, for designing my artwork for me. That bullfinch picture is a picture that I actually took of a bullfinch in my garden, and he made it into my logo, my artwork. So thank you to Randy. Yes, I'm on Facebook as well. I have a Facebook page, and that's the Casual Birder Podcast. But join the group. Come and speak to us in the group, because there's a lot of us in the group, and it's nice to have those conversations. You can post photographs of the birds you're seeing, and I really, really do like seeing other people's photographs and hearing the tales that they have. It's not all about me. It's mostly about me, but it's not really. It's about everyone. But you're doing, and the birds. It's about the birds.
You're doing a wonderful job, Suzy. I love listening to your podcast. I think maybe John might check it out, but he said, tell her, yes, I will send it to you. So he will send you the clip.
Oh, thank you.
So that's incredible. I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who came by the live chat today, to Rhett, to Tim, to Adam, to Bandrew, to John, to Charlotte. That's incredible that she could make it. Yeah, I really enjoyed having all of you here. I appreciate you being here, Suzy. I'm grateful that we connected and that we have a love of nature. And
so thankful. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've enjoyed our other chats.
I really do appreciate.
We're going to gush over each
other.
Sorry.
It's the delay, yeah. It's mutual, big hugs.
Yeah. Yeah, so please do listen to the Casual Birder Podcast with Suzy, and hang out. Go and find her in the Facebook group, because it's an awesome place to hang out, and take 10 minutes. Do a casual birding experience. Just take notice of what's around you. Slow down. Give yourself that gift of nature, which is a quote by someone. I can't remember who the author is at the moment, but do give yourself the gift of nature, because it does help calm you down and lift you up and make you feel amazing. So yeah, you can do that by listening to Suzy.
Yes, I'm much calmer in my show.
You were beautiful today. Thank you, Suzy.
Thank you.
I look forward to chatting again sometime soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heather.